Hello, you absolute mad lads. I have returned once again to bring you guys some quality Kenshi content, this time in the form of a good old-fashioned build video, something that I haven't done in quite the while. And I'm happy to bring it back, and I'm actually really excited about how this one in particular turned out. So, before I go ahead and get started on that, though, I have to do my usual YouTuber stuff. So please do remember to hit like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. And if you do want to support the channel in a more personable way, do consider becoming a channel member. It comes with a whole host of special perks and privileges, such as early access to all of my long-form videos 24 hours in advance before the rest of the public gets to see them, a special badge in chat that identifies you as an official member of the Mad Lads Guild, and a shout-out in every one of my long-form videos. And lastly, I do have an exciting announcement. As many of my longtime viewers are aware, I have been an avid fan of D&D and TTRPGs for well over a decade. And so if you guys want to hear me talk about something other than Kenshi with the same passion and fervor that you guys have come to expect over the last 3 years, head on over to my second channel, the Hero Table, where I'm going to be talking about all things D&D and TTRPG related, including tips, tricks, guides for both DMs and players, as well as stories, both good and bad. This is a project that I've been mulling over doing for quite some time, and I'm excited to see it finally getting off the ground. So I do hope to see you all there, and finally, we can get on to the build. All right, so first things first, I decided to do this build in the swamp. I've never done a base in the swamp before. This is a first for me. I'm typically, I typically build in more mountainous areas, more drier areas. I've never done a build in the swamp for a couple of reasons. The main one, obviously, being that the swamp is incredibly laggy for the most part and has a lot of loading issues, which you will see later in the video. I had a couple weird glitches happen, one or two things happen that I ended up having to take care of. But I picked this particular spot because I liked the tree coverage and I liked the kind of like natural wall that it had, and I thought I could integrate it well into the build itself. So I built my little shack there. I used obviously building materials to build that tiny shack. You always want to build your first before you do anything with the Shift to 12 menu, you want to build a shack to establish your outpost in the game system. Otherwise, you end up with a whole host of stupid things that happen later on. This is a good way to combat that. So I really wanted to stick to the same motif as the swamp. I didn't want to just like come in and start using storm buildings or a whole host of other buildings. I really wanted to stick with the swamper motif, which ended up proving to be kind of difficult because the swamp tile set only has like a handful of buildings. There's only like 4 or 5 buildings total. So I had to get kind of creative with how I was doing things, but I wanted the swamp dome to actually, naturally be like my centerpiece. Anybody who's watched my videos for a really long time knows that I am a big fan of having like one large like keep and then kind of building outwards around it. So I had this idea to kind of have these little the watchtowers break off and branch off of the main swamp platform, but I was having a bit of a hard time finding a spot to put it where it would be fully accessible. I don't mind if it's dug into the tree a little bit because then it kind of looks like they're building into the terrain, but it was a little too much. So I decided to move the swamp dome out from underneath the large root that was there and instead put it off to the side a little bit, and then I was going to kind of go from there. And I figured I'd put it by this natural iron vein. That way, we could have some mining happening in the back, and I'd fence it off later on. So I put the watchtowers, which are going to replace my usual towers. I would usually put like the storm watchtowers or, something along that line to throughout the base and connect them off. But because we're in the swamp, it's going to be a lot of this like really rickety makeshift wooden buildings. And so I was dropping a couple of these watchtowers, and I would end up putting some turrets off of them later on. I was going to put another one up here, and I kind of experimented with it for a little while, but I end up moving away from having too many of them connected because I wanted some variety as well, and I wasn't really sure about the placement. And then you'll notice right here where some of the legs on the watchtower itself would block and impede the path, and so I kind of tried to rotate it so that way they wouldn't block the path, but I wasn't able to get it in a way that I liked it or in a way that I felt wasn't going to damage the overall look of the build. So I ended up scrapping that and going for a building itself, and I wanted to drop down a couple swamp houses. So I played with a couple of positions here. I ended up putting this particular building on the other side because of the where the positioning of the bridge that goes onto the actual house. I ended up moving stuff around and putting it on the other side, if I recall. Excuse me. But just a lot of playing. It's the same thing that I do in all of my builds. It's a lot of micro movements and playing things around. I didn't want it to impede the stairs the way that it did. That's why I ended up switching it. I didn't mind so much that it was so clunky, just that it was impeding the main walkway. So Once I got that into position, I ended up using a different swamp house that was a little less clunky on that side and had a better positioned, spot for the bridge and stuff. And I've had a couple people ask me on some of my other builds on whether or not these are functional. All of my bases I test afterwards to make sure that they are functional, and then if anything is wrong with them where it doesn't work, I will make a point to mention it in the video. So just for anyone wondering, yes, all of these bridges, all of these walkways that I'm putting up, they are fully functional. This bridge here was actually my way of getting around. I realized that they had these external bridges, and those end up coming in handy quite a bit, and that's my way to get around some of the weird placements of the stairs and stuff. So I end up using these bridges quite a bit throughout this build to connect various buildings and kind of create like that upward walkway pathway similar to what you'd see in Shark. And that makes sense because my idea behind this base was that it's controlled by the Hounds. It's a facility that's controlled by the Hounds. Now, at this point, I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with it. I kind of went into this without a plan, which is not how I usually do things. I'm usually much more structured and put together when I'm making my builds. But in this one in particular, I kind of went into it kind of blind. I didn't have any plan. I didn't even decide that I was going to base into the swamp until I think 15 minutes into me looking for a place to build. And then I was like, you know what, let's hit the swamp. I've never done the swamp before. It's not an area that I've never built in before. So I wanted to kind of experiment with it. And I ended up being really satisfied with how it turned out. Considering what it is and where it is and all the hiccups that may be involved with that. So once I realized that I had that bridge technique that I did up front, I decided to back these watchtowers up so that way the legs of the tower would not impede any movement along the rim of the dome. So you'd be able to get a full range of motion around there. So I ended up dropping a couple more of these bridges, and then I got them lined up, and then I manually use the Shift F12 menu to rotate them and put them into place. So you can see right there, I'm just rotating out. And that's what a lot of this build was a lot of micro movements, especially because I had to use so many smaller pieces to kind of make up for the fact that I was only using, like 3 building types, because there really is only 3 or 4 building types in the swamp, theme, the swamp tile set, one might say. So I hadn't really come up with an idea for what the rest of the base was. I'm kind of just putting things together at this point. There wasn't really a rhyme or a reason for how I was doing things. It was a lot more free and flowy than my typical methodology of building, right? Like I usually drop the gate first and then build around that. In this one, I was kind of freeballing it and just going with it and letting what happens happen, and seeing where things went with it. And you can kind of see that in my more chaotic movements than in some of my other builds per se. That's when I felt like I was jumping around like an awful lot in comparison to some of my other builds. So I do think it's a bit more noticeable how kind of bouncy I get on it. But after a while, it got much easier to come up with some ideas. So as always, orientating myself, getting everything set up. A lot of micro rotations, getting bridges set up, getting bridges put together. So, this place, again, my end model was essentially that this is a facility controlled by the Hounds. It's a subsect of Shark. It's supposed to be an offset of the main city, and I ended up going later on with a Hashish production facility. And you'll see that transition as I start to put things down and lay the groundwork for what is essentially a giant hemp farm and hashish production facility. And my idea was that this is the area that the swampers use as their primary modus operandi of that's not the right word, is their primary facility for production of hashish, because Shark is controlled by several gangs, and drug production is one of the big things that happens here, because they don't really have a formal position of government or a formal group that's controlling Shark. Fun fact, that the people of Shark don't have actual control over their own city. It functions a lot like New Vegas or New Reno from Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 2, where it's actually just a syndicate of various crime families that control the entire place. And so they'd have like this big, big production facility that's, running things from behind the scenes. So this was when I started to kind of wall things in and get the general shape of the wall. I decided to actually build just like the makeshift walls, because again, this is the swamp. I don't want them to have like a big fancy base with huge walls or anything like that. It's really a swamp base, and so I didn't want it to be too far removed from Shark, because this isn't supposed to be like a replacement for Shark. It is just a facility that the people of Shark, or that the gangs controlling Shark, would use. So they would build it very similarly to Shark, but you wouldn't want it to be something that kind of eclipses Shark in its functional. And I tried to kind of, use the natural fauna to my benefit. I really tried to get some of the gates and stuff to line up with the tree roots and kind of wrap around them, and maybe in some spots even use the tree roots as like natural breakpoints for the wall, and really tied the environment into my building. Like this giant tree here, I just connected right to it, and it works out because no one's going to be able to get through it. And at the same point, it just looks good. It looks like it's an area that people would actually build. And I really like including the environment in my builds like that. When you include the environment, it makes it seem like it's an actual thing that people would build, because, especially in Kenshi, they don't have access to all of the machinery that we would have in the modern era to, level an area out and make it more functional, more habitable, more easy to build on. They're not going to be filling in swampland with gravel and dirt and stuff to make it easier to build on. They're going to build above it and use the terrain. So that's something that I try to keep in mind when I'm putting this place together. So now that the walls were put up and I had the main gate, I did need to make some kind of defensive position for the main gate, right? Because I need to have turrets that can shoot off of the main gate and keep the enemies outside in the event that we're being sieged or that we're being attacked. And that's where these watchtowers come in. So I'm going to be placing a lot of these throughout the build. Just a ton of watchtowers, just an absolute ton of watchtowers. And it was here, I decided that I was going to put the watchtower right around here, but the shack was in the way, and I wasn't quite in the mood to delete the shack yet. I hadn't quite gotten there yet. So I hadn't gotten there yet. So if I recall, actually, I make a small whoopsie, which I will go ahead and explain here in a minute once it happens. And I end up fixing it, but I do make a small mistake that I have to reload in order to fix. So a couple swamp houses. I thought it'd be cool if instead of everything being inside the fence, some of the houses were actually outside of the fence, and then I would raise them up like so. So that way they were accessible from the inside, but not from the outside, but they were not necessarily inside the walled building. So I just thought it would be a nice touch and kind of shift things around a little bit, especially because everything's so raised off the ground. They don't necessarily need to be inside the fence. They just need to be accessible from inside the fence, was the thought process behind that. So right here, I'm just trying to fill in some space and get some more buildings put together and fill in some of the gaps. It was right around now that I started to realize that I only have so many building types, and I didn't want to overplace a building and then get sick of it, So I decided to drop some turrets, but some of the buildings I had manually moved already, so the blue nodes had not updated, because you have to save and reload in order for the nodes to update, and I hadn't quite gotten to that point yet, so the nodes were out of place and not correct. I didn't want to place them until I had fixed the location of the buildings. That way when I reloaded, they weren't just like floating in the air. So I dropped a couple of turrets by the front, couple up here. It's a little bit more free, more chaotically placed, maybe not as strategic per se, or not as like aesthetically strategic, because my thought is, again, these are like a crime family. They're not going to care too much about how aesthetic the place looks. They're more focused on just defense and functional. So I save, I reload, and that fixes the nodes as well. Now when it reloads, there's this little moment here. You notice everything's taking forever to properly load in, and this is one of the reasons that I don't typically build in the swamp. is that it's just a super, super annoying area to load into. So it's taking forever for the fawn and stuff to load in. I was like, oh, you know what? Let's dismantle the shack, right? No big deal. Except it is a big deal because I forgot to replace down my town marker. And so when I deleted the shack, I deleted my outpost because I hadn't ensured that my town marker was there yet. And then I run into this stupid problem where I just was loading forever. It was like the craziest loading screen that I've had in a very, very long time. So always make sure to place down your town marker. If anybody doesn't know how to do that, you're going to see me do it here in just a second. Place down the town marker to make sure that everything is up to date before you save it. So place down the town marker, then save it, then reload your game. That makes sure that everything is owned by you and everything works and does what you need it to do properly. So we load in and there we go. All is well. I managed to delete that, place down the town marker, delete the shack, and the outpost is still here. So no big deal, easy fix. It just was a momentary, I wouldn't even say a setback. It was just me being a dope and not thinking about it. So always make sure that you place down your town marker prior to saving and reloading if you plan on deleting a building like the shack or anything like that, because you may accidentally delete your town in its entirety. So it was great. Right about here, I considered dropping a wall ramp to get down from here, but then I realized that I didn't have a node, and so I can't place the ramp unless there's a node to connect to the ramp, and then I can move the ramp manually, but I didn't want to bother placing a wall down just to get the ramp to place and then, do that. And I thought it'd be better to utilize these bridges that they have, like the walkways and stuff like that. So I utilized a bridge and, I dropped that down and then I rotate it into place to make it fit the vibe, and it has that, the wooden look and everything. So it evens out. So I dropped this and I used this particular arch one because, it just looked like it was kind of like shoddily built when you rotate it. Like it comes off to a massive decline. And I don't know why, but that just seemed to fit for me, where they would like build it at this heavy, heavy, steep decline as it comes through, because it's not, they're not really thinking about ease of use. They're just throwing things together haphazardly to do what they need or watch over people. So, and at this point I hadn't quite decided what kind of what was this, in short, I hadn't decided at this point whether or not the workers of this particular area were going to be working here willingly. We'll go with that. Were they going to be here again? Is this a camp that they would send people to against their will to work at, or is it the kind of camp where they'd have like other members of their gang or their faction working? And I hadn't quite decided that. I ended up deciding later on, but I dropped that shack in the back to act as the storage facility where they would store up all of the iron and stuff that they had harvested. And then I had this big gap right here, which confused me. You can see me kind of like looking around a lot, and I was confused because I could have swore there was foliage here. And this is one of the other reasons that I tend to avoid the swamp, is that when you reload, there's just inconsistencies with the foliage and stuff. And so I was like, I got to fill this place in. So I started looking for like a tree or something to put there. Just something that I could put there, but I ended up not finding anything, and it ends up working out anyway, because when I reload later on, the foliage comes back, the giant tree root comes back. So it was just the byproduct, like the nature of me having to save and reload so many times in the swamp. When you're doing a build like this in the swamp, you're going to run into issues like that. And these are not things that I typically run into. It's just because of the way that the swamp is set up. There's so many assets, there's so many trees, so many pieces of foliage and stuff like that, that it just bugs and glitches are far more common, far more likely, which is one of the many reasons that I tend not to build here. But again, even in spite of all that, things end up working out pretty well in the long run towards the end here. So it's cool. I was looking for a couple things. I thought maybe putting a rock down, but I couldn't find any that I liked and also were big enough to like matter, because I didn't want to just put like, oh look, it's a tiny little rock, or like stack them up or anything like that. I just ended up moving on from it anyway, and finding something else to do. But I dismantled the fence a little bit and decided to expand on what was there and kind of change the generalized layout of the fence anyway, to not just be this straight long. It was too straight is what it was. It was just a straight wall, and so I was like, you know what, let's encompass more of the tree and give me a little bit more space here. And I'm glad I did that. I'm glad that I did that. It kind of opened things up because right up until then it was basically just like a straight line from the swamp dome. There was no breakage. There was no. It just looked like a straight line. It looked boring. I wasn't for it. So here I am trying to find some more stuff to place down. I wanted to put something kind of sort of in the tree as much as I could within reason, because obviously, you know, you know, you can't build in the tree exactly, but you can build in the tree, you know. So I really wanted to build something that was up in the tree to a degree, and so this is what I ended up coming up with, which is that I put this building here, kind of partially on the tree trunk. And then I use these bridges to create like a fake little kind of swing bridge, and then I manually place down poles underneath it to you know, give it shape and form and make it look like it's actually being held up by these posts and stuff. But I created this little rounded bridge using these walkway pieces. Nothing extravagant. I was really happy when it, you know, ended up working in my test runs later on. And I connected those to a watchtower. The watchtowers work out because they have those little gaps right there where there's no fencing. So I just, you know, connected it off to the watchtower, and then it was this kind of like little, you know, not necessarily a tree fort, but it was a series of buildings that was kind of more interconnected in the tree, and it kind of brought the environment into place a bit more. So I dropped this down, make it line up nice and well. And then later on I'll go through and I'll add poles to the bottom of those bridges to make it look like they're not just floating in the air, they're being held up. So now I'm you know, really just going back to finding things to fill in spaces. So here's where I found those poles, those supports. I start placing them down. They didn't need to be perfect because, again, this is not a build that is was done by a faction that would really care if it was all perfect. They're more focused on functionality more than aesthetics. So, you know, in that same vein, they're not spending time worrying about, hey, does this look super nice? You know, they're throwing together buildings and shacks and walkways from scrap wood and pieces of scrap metal and sheet metal that they can find. It's not, you know, it's not anything crazy fancy or anything like that. So now I'm just trying to find stuff to, you know, fill in the spaces, fill in the gaps, make things look good. I think about maybe adding another building up on the tree to kind of expand on it and have like a little, ideally I would have been able to like build up along the entirety of the tree, right? And build like a kind of like a tree city that works its way up the tree. But the way that Kenshi's buildings are shaped and oriented, it would never happen, at least not in its current standing. So then I thought maybe adding a building that kind of branches off of this watchtower, but it was too tall because I needed to be able to not see, you know, underneath the platform. Like I wanted the poles of the platform to connect to the ground, essentially. So I ended up scrapping that idea, and I just try to find a couple more buildings that I can place down to, you know, kind of break things up. I drop a little swamp store here. Nothing crazy. Again, we're just filling space at this point, and I'm trying to find ways to make it seem less empty, you know. And so right now we're filling buildings, and I'm like, all right, you know, we're starting to get a good shape together. Everything is walled in. I'm really enjoying the overall shape of the place. It's coming along quite nicely. So my next thing that I want to, you know, worry about is stone refining. Where am I going to mine? So originally I drop a stone mine right here because 50% stone. I was like, we can mine in front, but then I was like, no, that doesn't really fit for me. And I end up putting the stone mine in the back where we do the iron refinery, right? The iron mining. Because I wanted to keep things separate, right? And so this was around the time I decided to make this place a farm. And so I wanted to keep the ore mining separate from the farming stuff, right? Like they do this as more of a means of production on the back end, and this is where they have people, you know, mining and stuff like that. But on the front end, that's where they're doing the major production stuff. And then it was around this time I realized that the watchtowers that were in place were not so much for keeping enemies out. It was more or less for keeping the workers in. So, I start to kind of lean towards that avenue as well with their placement, in that the watchtowers would be watching over the workers, but not so much for their safety, more or less to make sure that they're working. Now the swamp, if I recall, doesn't have very good wind power, so I realized that I would have to rely primarily on generators and batteries, and so I just dropped 3 generators down. Nothing, it'll do. I don't think that they would have them in a building because, again, these are swamp people. They're not necessarily super smart. They're more focused on production, So I dropped on these biofuel distilleries. For some reason, I had it in my head that green fruit was what I was going to grow here originally. And so I put down the green fruit because I was like, they're going to grow the fruit and then they're going to use that as fuel. But green fruit, despite this place having a 100% fertility, it is not good for growing green fruit. It's not good for growing wheat straw. It's perfect, however, for growing hemp, which was where I ended up settling on the swamper drug den type deal, the Hounds Hashish facility. So right here, I realized that the vegetables were not going to grow. Wheat was not going to grow. But hops would grow. But I was like, I don't really want to grow hops. What will grow for sure is hemp. And then I realized that I had these old hemp farms where they actually have the plants out like this, and they're not cased in by the built-in fences. And I was like, this gives me an idea. And so I start placing down just rows upon rows of hemp, really just creating that imagery of this big farm, right? I wanted it to be like you walk in and it's a straight line, like just full on plantation, basically. You walk in and it's a straight line of just plants, as far as the eye can see. It's a walkway. You kind of walk on through. You see people working on either side of you, and you walk through straight to the main dome. I was really trying to create like a good imagery here, and it worked out because I had a good amount of space to do it. It wasn't perfectly symmetrical or perfectly lined up. I did the best that I could with the space that I have, but I ultimately think it turned out pretty good, and I like the way that the various pathways kind of just like make themselves, and you're going to see that here in just a minute when I finish placing these down, how that all looks. But it came out really, really good. I was really, really, really satisfied with how this came out. And I'm glad that I chose to use the old hemp farm, where it has like the plants just out in the open like that. I think that it just has more of a rugged, like natural look in the way that you would expect from the swampers. They're not going to be building fences. They're just focused on the growth. So I dropped all those plants down. Everything's looking good. I got rid of the biofuel distilleries because those were green fruit, and I replaced them with hemp ones because not only are they producing hashish, but they're going to use some of the leftover hemp that they have to power their machines. So I place those down, get those lined up. I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to place them. I ended up dropping 2 of them right here, right alongside the shack. Sorry, 3 of them, right alongside the shack. And then boom, we have our generators and our distilleries. We have all of our hemp production right here. Just rows upon rows of hemp plants. And now I was like, you can see them, but because of the way the ground is set up, they're kind of difficult to necessarily see. So I kind of want to wall them in some way. And so I was considering different ways to do that. I thought about maybe putting down a concrete wall, but I felt like that would kind of like it wouldn't match the look. Concrete is a little too clean for these guys, and I didn't really care for the look of it. So I ended up settling for more fencing. So for these ones in particular, I ended up going for the swamp fencing over the makeshift fencing because it looks a little less put together than, say, the makeshift fencing in comparison, right? So I go for the swamp fencing where it's got the kind of gaps and the holes, and it looks a little bit worse than the other ones. And I make sure to remove a little piece of gate for the walkways and stuff, and I fence them in, and there we go. And that kind of breaks off and it keeps whoever's working in, it keeps whoever's walking through from necessarily just being right up there alongside the alongside the product. You know, it kind of separates the worlds a little bit. Getting these lined up was super annoying. I had to find a spot where it wouldn't try to automatically snap to the other fence, so I had to start way over here and kind of work my way around, which was a little frustrating, but we got there. And then right here, I kind of make sure that I have enough room. I'm going to head to, you know, it's a little less even and, you know, strategically placed than, say, some of my other builds. But that's kind of the point, you know. It's not necessarily as perfect because they wouldn't want it to be as perfect. They wouldn't think about perfection. They're more focused on functionality, as I've said before. So, and I had them low enough in the ground that it doesn't look like they have an actual fence. It just looks more like they have like a barbed wire keeping them in, but it's not an actual fence. I thought it was a really cool look, a really unique look. I was very satisfied with it. Everything was coming along super well. I was pretty happy with it. In just a second, you're going to see me save and reload, and then it's gonna cut really weird, and that's because again, building the swamp, that jump right there, I had a crash, you know. So you know, no big deal. I reloaded and we jumped right back in, and then that's when that root that had disappeared earlier showed back up. So I'm glad that I didn't try to pile on a bunch of rocks or anything like that, and you know, fill it in with garbage, because that root ended up reappearing. And I was happy with the placement. I was happy with the way it looked. I was kind of, you know, just looking around. I got a couple of the hounds attacking the front here because they wanted to get after Bark, who was not in great shape. He was not in great shape. So he had fought off one hound prior to me hitting the record button and had most of his limbs. I mean, he won by the skin of his teeth, but he wasn't in good shape. So now, per usual, I got to drop my torches because, as I've said in all of my build videos, the build really doesn't come together until you drop your torches. So that's what I did next. Drop down some torches all over the place. Try to get them lined up pretty nice. You know, I always try to put torches by pretty much every walkway, every entrance, because once nighttime hits and the torches all light up, it just brings everything together. It's like the chef's kiss, just piece de resistance. So really good stuff. Super happy with that. Drop a couple of the torches down on all the buildings, some of the walkways, the towers. I want those to be lit up as well. I want to be able to see where we could, so we dropped those down in front of all the walkways. Yeah, it was good. It was good. Torches really bring everything together. It's one of my favorite things to start placing down. Excuse me. It's very late when I'm recording this, so I'm currently just yawning like crazy. Yeah, so just drop torches down. Every building gets a torch, gets 1 or 2 torches, and just to lighten the place up once the sun goes down. You know, really keeps everything alive. Adds a lot of depth and ambiance to the city that you don't usually see, and it also helps with the fact that the ground really blends into the look of the rest of the base a lot, because the ground is supposed to be like mushy and covered in sticks and debris and twigs and stuff, but as a result, its texture tends to kind of wash out some of the other buildings, so it's kind of hard to see them. You know, but it kind of helps break up some of that. So drop a couple more turrets down on some of these platforms, because again, this was around the time that I started to put together that they wouldn't just want to defend the base from enemies on the outside. They also want to defend the base from the workers on the inside. So they'd have, you know, guards posted up on the tower watching them work. You know, if anybody gets out of line, if anybody tries to run, if anybody tries to steal, they gun them down. They're not just fighting the enemy outside, but they're fighting the enemy inside too. And the enemies, you know, in their minds is the workers. So drop a couple more turrets on all these out here to keep an eye on the workers. I tried to put them in strategic spots where they would not only have the best vantage point to see potential threats outside, but also, again, the threats that are on the inside. And yeah, I mean, things were they were coming along really good. I was pretty satisfied with it. I did a couple laps around to see where we were at, and it just looked really good. I was happy with it. I decided to back up, and you know, that's the base. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you like that. And per usual, we will now roll the montage.
waking up this morning, waking up before it's getting 9. Kinda heavy on my shoulders, tracking down some moments back in time. I could've swore that I was in it, down to every minute. Don't know what I was sipping, but I felt like I was doing fine. Oh my. Turns out that I just got a little bit south, just a little bit north of the Georgia line.